Welcome back. The fight between the feds and Apple firing up now, inspiring angry reaction at the state level. Maricopa County, Arizona Attorney Bill Montgomery saying his office will no longer provide iPhone upgrades for its staff. Saying instead, Apple's refusal to comply with law enforcement, quote, put Apple on the side of terrorists instead of on the side of public safety. Joining us from Phoenix to talk about his decision is Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery. Bill, nice to see you this morning.
Hi, thank you, Clayton. Good morning.
Bill, I have to admit, being totally honest with you, when I first heard this story, I thought it was a joke, that the attorney, the head attorney for Maricopa County, was going to tell his staff, employees, that they couldn't use one of the most secure phones in the world. Instead, they would have to use less secure phones. Critics would say this is a PR stunt, the very thing you're accusing Apple of doing, no?
Well, absolutely not. And let's be clear, too, that this was an agency decision in response to a circumstance where we've got a corporation that certainly has the means and ability to cooperate with the FBI, decides that they don't want to do so, even though this is a very important investigation. And so what I did in response was look at the fact that, you know, I'm a fiduciary for public tax dollars, and I'm not going to spend them then for a law enforcement agency where they don't want to cooperate with a law enforcement agency.
But Apple, the iPhone being one of the most secure phones in the world, then, have you drawn up a list of other phones that, you know, because we have, obviously we know this week that Google came out in support of Apple, Microsoft came out in support of Apple. So you have the Android operating system, you have Microsoft Windows operating system, and you have Apple. What phones does that leave you then to provide to your employees if you don't use any of those three?
Well, and two distinctions to make. First is that, you know, employees who currently have an iPhone can keep it. It's just we're not going to upgrade or replace it for another iPhone, and new employees are not going to be issued iPhones. And the issue for me is not necessarily internal security. We don't have an issue with that. The issue had to deal with whether or not a company was going to cooperate in a legitimate law enforcement investigation that's compliant with the Fourth Amendment and with constitutional due process. Now, if these other companies want to line up behind Apple like that, then rather than put me in an untenable position, I think it puts them in an untenable position and should really motivate Congress then to reset everything back to where it was.
But isn't that really the issue of this? Isn't that really the heart of all of this? Because you've argued that this puts Apple on the side of terrorists, and yet we here at Fox have heard from thousands of people across the country that are not members of ISIS, but they've said, look, I care about my security. I don't want the federal government or somebody else getting their hands on this encryption key to be used for nefarious purposes. That they care about security. We've got personal health data on these phones. Our kids' tracking location is on these phones. My banking information, everything we have in our lives are on these devices. They're not members of ISIS.
Sure. Well, Clayton, and at the same time, too, that's a false choice. It's not either or. You know, this isn't an instance where if Apple or Google or anybody else were to cooperate with a law enforcement investigation, then immediately everybody's personal privacy is at stake. And let me make one other clear point here, too. I put my faith in protecting my privacy, because I'm an American citizen like everybody else, in the Fourth Amendment in our Constitution. I'm not going to put my protection of my privacy in the hands of some benevolent corporate CEO who thinks he's the privacy messiah.
And yet Apple,
we have processes in place.
Apple has, and according to my sources, had been working with the FBI long before this went public and had handed over boatloads of data. Apple says they're willing to sit down at the table and find out something that could work at the congressional level. We're going to have these hearings next week. Bill, we're out of time and up against a hard break. I could continue talking about this for the rest of the morning. We appreciate you joining us, Bill. Thanks.
All right.